There's an idea in Elder Scrolls lore that the whole universe is a dream, not a figure of speech, an actual claim, made inside the setting's own lore, that everything in it, every god, every mortal, every war ever fought, is happening inside the mind of something that's dreaming it into being. The thing doing the dreaming is described as troubled by madness and by something like several minds sharing one being. A small number of people inside that universe are said to be working toward waking it up, or waking themselves out of it, which turns out to be the same goal seen from two different directions. That idea has a name: the Godhead. It's also one of the most disputed ideas in the entire setting, resting on very little that any released game has stated outright, and a great deal that comes from somewhere else entirely. This is the whole story of the Godhead, what it's supposed to be, the structure of towers and broken time it sits on top of, the 6 different ways a person is said to reach divinity while reaching for it, and exactly where every piece of the idea actually comes from. The word Godhead shows up in Elder Scrolls lore in 3 different ways, and most of the confusion around it comes from people mixing those 3 up without noticing. The first meaning is plain. Sometimes Godhead just means a group of gods who get talked about under one collective name. Almalexia, Sotha-Sil, and Vivek, the 3 Dunmer who became gods and ruled Morrowind together, are called a triune Godhead. That isn't a claim about the deep structure of reality. It's a label for 3 separate individuals being referred to as one unit, the same way a company's leadership might get called the board instead of 3 names. The second meaning is even simpler. Godhead also gets used as a plain stand-in word for the general process of a mortal becoming a god. In that sense, saying someone achieved Godhead just means they became divine. It's describing an event, not a being. The third meaning is the one this entire video is about, and it's written with a capital G on purpose. In this sense, the Godhead is a specific, singular entity. The official lore entry calls it an esoteric entity of disputed existence. That's the exact wording used on the record, and it's worth sitting with for a second because it's unusual for an official source to describe something and question whether it exists in the same sentence. The entry goes on to say the entity is plagued by madness and split personalities. Some belief systems inside the setting hold that this entity made the whole universe by dreaming it into being, which is why it also goes by the name the First Dreamer. Under that belief, everyone and everything inside the universe, including the gods people worship, exists inside that dream. The Godhead connects to 2 other ideas that get full chapters of their own later on. One is the Sijic Endeavor, a plan under which mortals are supposed to outgrow the gods that made them. The other is Kim, a state a handful of individuals are said to reach, which is described as giving them an ineffable sense of the Godhead along with a way out of the universe's normal rules. Past Kim, there's a further, rarer state called Amaranth, which is said to involve putting on the Godhead the way a god's role, or mantle, gets put on, and then dreaming a new universe the way the Godhead dreamed this one. That's the shape of the idea in outline. Separating the 3 meanings now, before any of the rest of it, is the only way the following chapters make sense, because writers, players, and wiki editors have used the same word for a group title, a life event, and a cosmic being since the earliest Elder Scrolls games, often in the same paragraph. Stated flatly, the claim is this: there's an entity of disputed existence, plagued by madness and by something like several personalities living in one being, and that entity dreamed the Orbis into existence. The Orbis is the word used for the totality of everything, every world, every plane of oblivion, every layer of the afterlife, the whole structure. If the claim is true, then everyone inside that structure, from the smallest mortal up through the gods who supposedly made the world, is a character inside somebody else's dream. The gods aren't exempt. Under this framework, Akatosh and Lorcan, and every other Aedra and Daedra, are themselves things the Godhead is dreaming. That's a large claim, so it's worth being just as flat about how much support it actually has. The entire official article on the Godhead runs to roughly 200 words. That's the whole of it. The three meanings covered in the last chapter, the description of madness and split personalities, the label First Dreamer, and the short note connecting it to Kim and Amaranth. There's no book in any released Elder Scrolls game titled anything like The Godhead Explained. No character walks up to a player and lays out the theory start to finish. What exists instead is a 200-word summary built by wiki editors out of scattered references, plus a much larger body of writing that the wiki itself flags as unofficial, forum posts, essays, and other material written by a former Bethesda developer after he had already left the company. None of that means the idea is made up. Plenty of things in Elder Scrolls lore are thin on the page and still widely accepted, because the games are built to leave gaps on purpose. But it does mean that when someone describes the Godhead with total confidence, as if it were established fact laid out in a sourcebook somewhere, they're filling in far more than 200 words worth of gaps. Most of what people repeat about the Godhead, its motivations, its exact relationship to Anu, what waking it up would even mean, comes from outside that short official entry. Where it comes from and how much weight it can actually carry is what the next chapter covers before anything else gets built on top of it. Before going any further, it helps to know who wrote most of the language this whole topic runs on, because a large share of it traces back to one person, Michael Kirkbride. Kirkbride joined Bethesda Softworks in April 1996, hired off a job ad in Next Generation magazine. His earliest job on the series was minor, working on textures for Daggerfall. He teamed up with a designer named Kurt Kuhlman, who had been hired the same day, and the two of them pitched a Pirates on Mars concept to Todd Howard that eventually became Redguard. Kirkbride wrote the game and produced its levels and art. Around the same time, he and Kuhlman wrote a pocket guide to the Empire, a booklet packaged with Redguard, and in doing so, they rebuilt a large part of Elder Scrolls lore from the ground up. Kirkbride later said he got interested in the series lore in the first place because he decided its gods made no sense at all. When planning began for the third mainline game, Kirkbride pitched a setting change from the previously planned Somerset Isle to Morrowind, and Todd Howard, by his own account, was immediately hooked. Ken Rolston, who ended up as Morrowind's lead designer, said he inherited the game's design from Kirkbride and Kuhlman, who had already worked out the story and the setting. Kirkbride was the dominant influence on how Morrowind looked and felt during its design phase. Kirkbride left Bethesda Softworks around June 2000, moving to California to work at a related studio. Even after leaving, he stayed in contact with the team, and in 2001 he was brought back on contract to write in-game books for Morrowind, the same as two other former writers who had also already departed. He wrote at least 53 of the books that appear in the finished game, including 3 that shaped the series' mythology more than almost anything else published before or since: the Monomyth, Varieties of Faith, and the 36 Lessons of Vivek. He had originally been asked to cover the material that became the lessons in about 6 books. He wrote 36 because, in his words, he found he couldn't stop. He kept contributing after that. He wrote books and dialogue for Oblivion, including lines for the game's antagonist, Mankar Camoran. He consulted on Skyrim in its early stages. In 2014, he released the script for C0DA, a graphic novel published entirely outside any game, presented as a conclusion to the story he had started in Morrowind. He has also spent decades posting on forums and other platforms, answering lore questions directly, sharing text that never made it into a released game, and expanding on ideas he had only sketched in the official books. Out of every writer who has worked on the series, he's the one who has put out the most lore outside the games themselves. That last fact is the reason this whole video needs a rule up front. The wiki that catalogs Elder Scrolls lore hosts hundreds of thousands of words of Kirkbride's posts, and it labels that entire collection unofficial. Not false, not non-canon in some blanket dismissive sense, just unofficial, material written by someone with more insight into the series' original design than almost anyone alive, delivered outside the games, on his own authority, after his formal role on most of those projects had ended. The wiki keeps it because it's useful, and because a lot of it lines up with, or fills gaps in, things the games only gesture at. But it isn't the same kind of source as a line of in-game dialogue, and it should never be treated as if it were. So here's the rule this video sticks to. Stated once, plainly, and then just applied from here on, without repeating the lecture every time. Any claim about the Godhead falls into one of three layers. The first layer is what happens in the games themselves. The towers, the Elder Scrolls as physical objects, dragon breaks, the new medium, Vivec as a character players actually meet, the warp in the west. That's the most solid ground available. The second layer is a book that exists inside a game, spoken or written by an in-world character who might be lying, mistaken, or writing poetry instead of history. The 36 Lessons of Vivec and the Mythic Dawn commentaries both sit here. Those are real in-world sources, but they're claims made by a character, not neutral narration. The third layer is a developer writing outside the games entirely. Kirkbride's posts, C0DA, the love letter from the Fifth Era, the material about something called Landfall. That layer is often the most detailed and the most influential on how fans talk about this topic, and it's explicitly not authoritative. Every claim from here forward gets labeled by which of those three layers it comes from. That isn't a hedge to make the video sound careful. It's the actual, honest state of the source material on this specific topic, and pretending otherwise would just be making things up. With the three-layer rule in place, the next claim can be stated plainly and checked against its source right away. The article on the Walking Ways, hosted on the same wiki as the official Godhead entry, states directly that the state beyond Kim, the rare condition called Amaranth, involves mantling the Godhead and dreaming in the same way as Anu, the previous Amaranth. That phrase, the previous Amaranth, is doing enormous work. If it's taken at face value, it means Anu himself once went through the same process that the Godhead's followers are trying to reach now. It means the current dream, the one everyone alive is supposedly living inside, isn't the first one. Somebody dreamed a universe before this one, reached whatever comes after that dream, and left it behind, and that somebody is described in this framework as Anu. Anu himself is a familiar figure well before this claim ever comes up. Under most cultures' versions of the creation story, Anu is one of two primal forces, standing for order and staying the same, paired against Padomai, who stands for chaos and change. Nearly every culture in the setting has an equivalent pair under different names, Anur and Fadomai to the Khajiit, Satak and Akel to the Redguards, the Light and the Dark in Breton folktales, Atak and Kota to at least one Argonian tribe. In the most commonly cited version, the Aelid creation myth called the Anuad, Anu, and Padomai, are brothers who wandered into the void together. Their interaction produced a third figure, Nir, who loved only Anu. Padome attacked her out of jealousy, Anu fought him off and banished him outside of time, and Nir died giving birth to creation. Anu, grieving, went to sleep inside the sun. Padme eventually broke back into the story and shattered what had been created. Anu woke, fought him again, and pulled the pieces together into the planet Nirn. In the last clash between them, Anu dragged both himself and Padme entirely outside of time, ending the fight permanently and in the process saving Nirn from further damage. Their spilled blood is said to have formed the gods, the Daedra from Padme's blood alone, the stars from Anu's, and the Aedra from a mix of both, which is why the Aedra are described as capable of good and evil at once. That's the story most cultures tell about Anu, as one half of a cosmic pair. The claim that Anu is the previous Amaranth sits on top of that story rather than replacing it, and it comes from a different kind of source than the Anuad. The Anuad is an in-world creation myth, layer 2. The description of Anu as a previous dreamer who already reached Amaranth is tied more directly to the Walking Ways framework itself, which draws heavily on both in-world sermons and Kirkbride's outside writing. Some Dunmer teaching, credit to Vivek, goes further still and claims that Padmai doesn't actually exist at all, that Anu never had a double in the first place, a direct allusion, in that teaching, to Anu being the Godhead under a different name. None of these versions agree with each other in the fine details, and the sources don't pretend to. What they agree on, across almost every culture's telling, is the shape of the pattern. Two forces, order and change, in conflict, producing everything else as a byproduct of that conflict. Whether Anu is simply one half of that old pair, or whether Anu is also, somehow, the being who dreamed the current universe into existence and already escaped an earlier one, is exactly the kind of question that keeps coming back up, because the answer changes depending on which layer of source is doing the talking. Before getting any further into gods and dreams, it helps to have a floor plan. The word for everything, the whole structure that holds Aetherius, Oblivion, and Mundus together, is the Orbis. It's also called the Grey Maybe, which is said to be what the word Nirn actually means in the old Aeon of X language. The Orbis is, for practical purposes, the entire universe, every plane of existence, every realm, every layer of the afterlife, all of it. Most sources describe the shape of the Orbis as a wheel. Mundus, the mortal world, sits at the hub. Aetherius forms the outer rim. 8 spokes connect the rim to the hub, and those spokes stand for the 8 divines. The gaps between the spokes are Oblivion, home to the Daedric princes. Outside the whole wheel is the void. Aetherius itself is described as the place all magic originally comes from, sometimes called the immortal plane or simply heaven. The stars and the sun are said to be holes in the barrier between Mundus and Aetherius, torn open by spirits who left the world during its creation, chief among them Magnus. When a mortal dies, assuming their soul doesn't stay bound to Nirn for some reason, it's commonly believed to travel to Aetherius and continue on as a spirit there. Different cultures have their own destination inside it. Sovngarde for the Nords, the far shores for the Redguards, the sands behind the stars for the Khajiit. Mundus, the mortal plane, is also called the Grey Maybe in its own right, or the Mundex terrain. Some sources treat Mundus and Nirn as the same thing. Others describe Mundus as something larger that Nirn merely sits inside. Its origin is murky even by the setting's usual standards. One version says the Aedra and Magna Geb built it from Lorkhan's idea and Magnus's designs. Another says Anu made it directly. Another says the planet Nirn is itself a goddess, one of the children born to the Khajiit creator pair Anur and Fadomai. Oblivion is the third piece, home to the Daedra, the Etada, or original spirits, who declined to help build Mundus. There are at least 16 major planes of Oblivion, one for each Daedric prince, and tens of thousands of smaller ones on top of that. Each realm is shaped by the will of the prince who rules it, and some accounts describe Oblivion as infinite in both size and number of realms, in a way that Mundus simply isn't. That three-part structure, Aetherius, Oblivion, Mundus, all held inside the Orbis, is the floor plan the rest of this video builds on. It doesn't by itself say anything about the Godhead or dreaming or Kim. It's just the layout of the house before anyone starts talking about who might be dreaming it. The period before any of that floor plan was fixed in place is called the Dawn Era, and the sources are consistent on one specific point. Nothing that happened during it can be told as a normal story. Time didn't move in one direction. A disagreement between two spirits could be, at the same moment, a difference of opinion and an actual war. One source calls this the War of Manifest Metaphors and says outright that the era can't support a conventional narrative. So the events usually get listed the way a myth gets listed, roughly in order, with the understanding that order is doing a lot of work in that sentence. In the broad shape most cultures agree on, two primal forces met in the void and produced a set of spirits, the Etada, out of their interaction. Lorcan, described as a barely formed urge more than a fully formed being, talked a large group of those spirits into building Mundus, a mortal world, arguing that it would let pieces of reality reflect on themselves and possibly become greater than the spirits who made them. Many agreed, including Magnus, who took on the job of architect. Some spirits refused outright and went off to build their own private realms instead. Those became the Daedric princes. Building Mundus turned out to cost the builders dearly. The mortal plane was unstable and dangerous, and the spirits who poured themselves into it started dying or losing themselves as they worked. Some, following Magnus, gave up on the project and fled to Aetherius, tearing the sky open on their way out and becoming the stars. Others stayed and gave themselves over completely to become the Earthbones, the physical laws of nature. A third group held something back and instead had children, becoming the ancestors of the mortal races. Once it became clear how much damage the project had done, the remaining spirits gathered at a tower on the Isle of Balfiera for something called Convention, meeting outside of normal time to decide what to do next. Lorcan was judged responsible. Accounts differ on the exact mechanics. Some say the knight Trinimac tore his divine center, the heart, out of him by force. Others say Lorcan spat it out himself, but every version agrees the heart couldn't be destroyed. It was fired across the world on an arrow and landed where it could never be recovered, striking what's now Morrowind and forming Red Mountain where it hit. With Lorcan dealt with, the surviving Aedra made a final decision. They would leave. The continued presence of powerful spirits was itself part of what made the young world unstable, so the gods withdrew from direct involvement in mortal affairs. Once they stepped back, the wild, non-linear chaos of the dawn settled down. Time started running in one direction. Convention is the hinge point where myth stops and history, in the ordinary sense, starts being possible at all. Everything the rest of this video covers happens after that hinge point and depends on it. The towers, the Elder Scrolls, Dragon Breaks, Kim, all of it exists because the world got nailed down at Convention into something orderly enough to support a normal story. And every idea explored from here forward is, in one way or another, about how much less permanent that arrangement actually is than it first appears. The wheel described in the last 2 chapters isn't just a convenient diagram. According to Vivek's own teachings, it's the literal foundation the entire orbis rests on, and there's a second image hiding inside it that the rest of this video depends on. Start with the wheel itself. The spokes are described as the lent bones of the Aedra, the earth bones, the same natural laws that spirits gave themselves over to become during the Dawn era. Outside the spokes lies Aetherius, the rim. Between the spokes sit the realms of oblivion. At the center, the hub, is Mundus, the world people actually live in. Here's the part that everything else in this video keeps returning to. Turn that wheel on its side. Looked at from the side instead of from the front, a wheel with spokes stops looking like a circle and starts looking like a letter, an I. The teaching calls this the secret tower. A circle, tipped over, becomes a tower, and because it's shaped like the word I, it also becomes a self. Vivek describes coming to the very edge of the Arbis at some point in this teaching and seeing exactly that. A circle turned sideways, spelling out the first word he ever learned. This is described as an objective view of reality itself, seeing the whole structure of existence from outside it, the way a person looking at a wheel from the side sees its true shape instead of just the part facing them. Anyone who manages to actually see the tower this way, according to the teaching, can reach Kim, the state covered in detail later in this video. Mortals living inside Mundus, at the hub of the wheel, are technically able to perceive the tower without ever leaving the wheel itself, because Mundus is described as a smaller reflection of the whole structure, the same shape repeated at a smaller scale right at the center. Physical towers built on Nirn are described as echoes of a single metaphysical tower, and understanding one is supposed to require understanding the other. This is where the phrase right-reaching comes from, the idea that some individuals reach a genuine understanding of the tower's true nature, as opposed to a surface-level, partial one. There's also a long-running dispute about why any of this happened in the first place, tied directly to Lorcan. People who take a sympathetic view of him argue that he built the whole apparatus, Mundus, the wheel, the possibility of the tower, specifically so that other beings could find and use what he found. His exact motives are disputed across every culture that tells the story. Everyone agrees he failed at whatever he set out to do. Some sources go further and argue the failure itself was deliberate, a demonstration built to show later mortals exactly how not to fail when they tried the same thing. That single image, a wheel that becomes a tower when it's turned on its side, and a tower that's also the letter that means I, is the piece of teaching the rest of this video keeps circling back to, because nearly every claim about mortals becoming gods eventually gets traced back to somebody managing to see it clearly. The physical towers built across Tamriel are all, according to the lore, modeled on one original, the Adamantine Tower, also called Adamantia, the Direni Tower, Ur Tower, or Tower Zero. It stands on the Isle of Balfiera, in the Iliac Bay, and magical dating places its construction at roughly 2,500 years into the Merethic era, making it the oldest known structure anywhere in Tamriel. The tower is a tall, circular structure, a seamless spire of ageless metal, at least half sunk into the ground, with a core that has never been altered no matter how many times the surrounding fortifications were rebuilt around it. Some accounts say the metal core extends as far below ground as it rises above it, and its lower reaches have never been fully explored. Architects who have studied it have noted that a structure of its proportions shouldn't, by any known principle of building, be able to stand. This is where convention actually happened, the meeting described in the last chapter, where Lorcan was judged and the Aedra chose to withdraw from the world. That's also why the tower is sometimes called the House of We by the spirits who built it. At its base sits the foundation vault, and inside that vault sits the stone all the other tower's stones are modeled after, the Zero Stone. It has sat there, inert, through the entire recorded history of Tamriel. Some of the greatest mages in history have tried to unlock its secrets and failed. Every member of the Direni line who eventually took over the island is brought to the vault at maturity and permitted to touch the Zero Stone once, to feel the power running through it, though nobody has ever managed to make it do anything beyond that. The tower's smooth exterior has exactly one break in it, a sealed door called the Argent Aperture, set with a lock made of 13 slowly counter-rotating rings. As far as any record shows, it has never been opened. Every other tower on Nirn is described as an echo of this one, some built in careful, deliberate imitation, others taking a much freer approach to the design. What a tower is actually holding up, according to this framework, is the stability of Mundus itself, the physical, spiritual, and temporal rules fixed in place at convention. Adamantia is the first and, by most accounts, the most powerful of them, simply because it's the original, the rest are copying. 7 other towers, at minimum, are described in the lore alongside Adamantia, each with its own stone and its own history. None of them command the same raw authority as the original, but each is treated as load-bearing for the stability of Mundus in its own region, and each has a story that stands on its own. White Gold Tower sits in the middle of what's now the Imperial City in Cyrodiil. The Aelids built it in direct, open imitation of Adamantia, hoping to borrow its power, and their imitation worked well enough that White Gold became known as Tower 1, even though the Crystal Tower on Somerset Isle was actually built earlier. Its stone is the Kim el Adabal, also called the Red Diamond, said to be a drop of Lorcan's blood that fell into an Aelid well as his heart sailed overhead on its way to Red Mountain, crystallized there, and was later cut into a gem. That stone became the centerpiece of the Amulet of Kings. White Gold still stands today. It survived the Oblivion Crisis, an attempt to drag it into Cold Harbor during the plane melt, and repeated attempts on the Amulet of Kings across multiple imperial dynasties. Red Mountain, also called Red Tower, formed where the heart of Lorcan actually landed after convention, in what's now Morrowind. Its stone is the heart itself. Long after it landed, the Dwemer settled the area, found the heart buried under the mountain, and began building tools to use its power. That project led directly to the Battle of Red Mountain, the disappearance of every Dwemer on Nirn, and the rise of the Tribunal, who drew on the heart's power for centuries afterward. Red Mountain still stands, though its most recent eruption, the Red Year, devastated the surrounding province. Crystal Tower, called Crystal Like Law, stood on Somerset Isle and was likely the very first tower built after Adamantia. Its stone, called Transparent Law, was said to anchor the tower simultaneously in every realm of the Aurbis at once, which made the tower itself a kind of doorway between realities. It fell during the Oblivion Crisis, torn down by Daedric hordes, though because it existed in every reality at once, some sources argue it may still stand intact somewhere else. Snowthroat isn't a built structure at all. It's the throat of the world in Skyrim, the mountain where the ancient Nords ended the Dragon War using an Elder Scroll, and later where Jurgen Windcaller built High Hrothgar. Its stone is thought to simply be a cave. Greensap belongs to the Bosmer, and it was grown rather than built. A great oak tree, sprung from something called a perchance acorn. Because the acorn itself could have grown into more than one possible tree, Greensap existed as multiple versions of itself at once, each one telling a different true story, until an Aelid sorcerer eventually collapsed all those possibilities down into a single fixed tree, the Elden Tree, that stands today in Valenwood. Orichalk is the least understood of the towers, essentially just a name and a stone, said to be a sword, tied to Redguard tradition and possibly lost along with the sunken continent of Yokuda. And then there's Wokpress, better known by its other name, the Numidium. Unlike the rest of the towers, it was built to move. The Dwemer designed it as an anthropomorphic machine god, meant to be powered by the heart of Lorkhan, requiring the souls of its own builders to give it a body. It has been called the welded knot at the center of Anu by at least one source close to Sothasil's clockwork apostles, who considered it one of the greatest metaphysical threats in existence. When it was finally completed and activated centuries later, it didn't run on the actual heart at all. A battle mage named Zurin Arctus built a working substitute called the Mantella instead, and it walked, literally, carrying the man who controlled it to conquer an entire continent. What that walk did to the world it walked through gets its own chapter shortly. Each tower, in its own way, is a smaller repeat of the same claim, that a structure built or grown or formed in imitation of adamantia can hold a piece of reality in place, tell its own version of events within its own reach, and, if it falls or is meddled with badly enough, threaten to unmake the stability convention was supposed to have settled for good. An Elder Scroll is one of the strangest objects the games actually put in a player's hands, and it matters here because it's in-game proof, not a claim from a sermon or a forum post, that the setting's own history isn't fixed the way normal history is. Nobody knows how many Elder Scrolls exist. Sources describe them as not existing in countable form. They can appear and disappear from place to place without warning. And any attempt to take a full inventory of them has failed for exactly that reason. They're written in an unknown script, alongside what look like star charts. A person with no training in their history can flip through one and feel nothing unusual. Someone who does understand what they're looking at is a different story. Reading a scroll without preparation costs a reader their sight, their sanity, or both, while giving them a glimpse of the future, the past, or the deep nature of reality in exchange. For centuries, the job of reading them safely has belonged to the cult of the ancestor moth, who used trained moths to soften the damage. It still costs something. Each reading blinds a moth priest a little longer than the last, until the blindness stops going away. The part that matters most for this video is what happens to a scroll's contents over time. Before a prophecy inside a scroll actually comes true, its contents are described as hazy and changeable. Different readers, or the same reader on different days, can get different answers from the same object. Once the event actually happens, the scroll's contents lock into place, fixed and identical for anyone who reads it afterward. One scholar, Urag Groshub of the College of Winterhold, put it in stronger terms still. He claimed the scrolls are a reflection of all possible futures and pasts, and that even the false answers a reader gets from one are, in some sense, still true. The dragon Parthenax is recorded saying something similar from the other direction, that the scrolls don't exist and yet have always existed. Scholars disagree about where the scrolls actually come from. They have been called fragments of creation from outside time and space, pieces of the divine, given physical form, objects the gods themselves would be afraid to tamper with. Nobody claims authorship of them. One detail ties them directly back to the towers already covered. The smooth metal core of the adamantine tower itself is said to be, in effect, a container for one massive Elder Scroll, which would make the oldest structure in Tamriel and the strangest object in Tamriel the same kind of thing at different scales. None of this proves anything about a Godhead or a dream. What it does prove, inside the games themselves, without needing a sermon or a forum post to back it up, is that Elder Scrolls history isn't single-valued. An object that exists in this setting and holds multiple true, contradictory versions of the same event at once is exactly the kind of thing that makes the rest of this video's claims possible to even ask about. A dragon break is what happens when the arrangement made at convention, one direction of time, one continuous history, stops holding. The name comes from Akatosh, the god of time, sometimes called the dragon god of time. When his hold on linear history fails, scholars in the setting call it the dragon breaking. It's described as a catastrophic disruption of linear time, a realignment forced by some event that makes ordinary, single-threaded continuity impossible to maintain. The chaos that follows is described as a refrain of the chaos of the Dawn era, the same kind of non-linear mess that supposedly existed before convention ever happened, breaking back into a world that was supposed to have moved past it. This isn't a fan theory layered on top of the games. It's a documented category of event discussed by in-world historians with a name they actually use and multiple attested examples. During a dragon break, several contradictory versions of history can all be happening at once, in the same place, to the same people, and then, eventually, time resumes running in one direction again, though what gets left behind afterward is rarely a single clean account of what happened. Two dragon breaks get named specifically and repeatedly. The longer and more disputed one is called the Middle Dawn, caused by a group called the Marukati Selective, which gets its own chapter next. The other, more recent one, is the Warp in the West, tied directly to the Numidium, which also gets its own chapter. There's also a third, less certain candidate. Because the Numidium's use has now been tied to a dragon break twice, some scholars have started to wonder whether the Battle of Red Mountain and the disappearance of every Dwemer on Nirn during it might have been an earlier dragon break as well, sometimes called the Red Moment. The accounts of that battle already conflict wildly with each other on basic points: who was loyal to whom, exactly how the Dwemer vanished, which fits with a dragon break having happened there, though nothing confirms it outright. Beyond the two confirmed cases and the one suspected one, the lore also describes smaller, related phenomena on a much reduced scale: time wounds, tears in reality left behind after a dragon break-like disruption, time breaches, small invisible rips that can build up into a new break if left alone, time knots, localized loops that can trap a whole town in a repeating stretch of days. All of them are treated as smaller versions of the same underlying problem, linear time being a maintained condition, not a guaranteed one, something that can fail locally as easily as it once failed for the whole of Tamriel at convention. The longest dragon break on record lasted, by the most commonly cited estimate, 1008 years, stretching from roughly the 13th to the 23rd century of the First Era. It's called the Middle Dawn, and it was caused deliberately by a group called the Maruhati Selective, an elite sect inside the Alessian Order. Their belief, laid out in a text called Vindication for the Dragon Break, was that Akatosh was meant to be a single, pure spirit, and that his nature had picked up what they called an Aldmeri taint, elements of the elven god Auriel mixed into him. They wanted that mixture undone, an act they called the Sacred Expungement. To do it, they used the Staff of Towers, and according to the account, a tower appeared before them, or a staff, or both together, treated as versions of the same thing, and the sect's secret masters danced on it until it spoke its true, original name aloud. Then the tower split into 8 pieces, and time broke. That last detail isn't a coincidence in isolation. It directly echoes the description in the wheel chapter of the orbis as a wheel with 8 spokes standing for the 8 divines, split apart the same way the whole structure is normally described as being built. Whether the Maruhati Selective actually succeeded at cleansing Akatosh of anything is never settled. What every source agrees happened, regardless of culture or region, is that 8 stars fell from the sky, one at a time, and people across Tamriel used their fall to count the days until the world came back together. Almost nothing else about the Middle Dawn is agreed upon. Cyrodiilic accounts, drawn from the memories held inside the Amulet of Kings, describe the empire during that time as spreading across the stars, or, in a different telling, becoming an egg. Dunmeri accounts describe borders constantly shifting while the Good Daedra and the Tribunal work together to protect Morrowind from the surrounding madness. Khajiit accounts claim only the moon stayed constant in the sky, and that only Khajiit under the influence of moon sugar could perceive that constancy, while everyone else fought phantoms and, in some accounts, gave birth to their own fathers. None of these stories line up with each other on basic facts, and the sources don't try to force them to. One Khajiit telling gives the event a specific shape worth mentioning on its own. In it, the spirit Boethra is pulled out of an ongoing battle and set down atop the adamantine tower, where she watches the Selectives try to speak a lie so convincingly it becomes true, erasing an entire lineage of spirits and the lands they created from having ever existed. Seeing what they're attempting, Boethra acts to stop them, and in doing so, glimpses 2 serpents fighting inside a ring of 12 burning wheels. One serpent standing for rejection of anything not purely mannish, the other, despite being surrounded by chaos, standing for something closer to gentleness. Boethra sides with the second one, and by naming what she sees for what it actually is, she ends the Dragon Break. That closing act later gets its own name, the Division of Heaven. Not every scholar in-world accepts that any of this happened at all. A historian named Faldrun argued in a book called The Dragon Break Re-Examined that the entire concept was invented in the early Third Era to explain away inconsistencies in an official historical encyclopedia, driven by what he called scholarly inertia and an unhealthy obsession with prophecy. His argument runs into a problem though. Sources describing a dragon break exist from well before the era he claims it was fabricated in, and there's at least one detail in his own book. He refers to the fall of a ruling dynasty in the past tense, years before that dynasty actually fell, that some readers take as accidental proof his own timeline had already been disturbed by the very thing he was trying to debunk. The connection to Cyrodiil possibly having been a tropical jungle at some point before recorded history gets exactly one honest sentence here, because that's roughly all the sources support. Some scholars have floated the idea that Cyrodiil's climate shifted from something closer to jungle into the temperate forests seen in the games, and some accounts loosely tie that shift to a tower's influence reshaping its surroundings to suit new rulers, but nothing pins that change specifically to the Middle Dawn, and the developer who worked on that era of the setting has only ever discussed it as a possibility, not a settled fact. The most recent Dragon Break is also the easiest one to actually follow, because it happened close enough to the present that agents were sent to investigate it directly and their reports survive. It's called the Warp in the West, or the Miracle of Peace, and it took place over 3 days in late the Third Era, 417, in the Iliac Bay region, shared by Hammerfell and High Rock. The chain of events starts with the assassination of King Lysandus of Daggerfall and the resulting scramble over an artifact called the Totem of Tiber Septim, which could control the Numidium, the same walking brass tower covered earlier. Whoever held the totem could command the golem. 7 different factions wanted it badly enough to fight for it. The kingdoms of Sentinel, Wayrest, and Daggerfall, each hoping to crush its rivals. The necromancer, Manimarco, who wanted the golem's power source, not the golem itself. A being called the Underking, seeking to reclaim something of his own from inside it. The orc warlord Gortwa Gronagorm, fighting for recognition of an orc homeland, and the Empire itself, trying to restore order to the region. What the Blade's own reports describe next is, in their own words, not a plausible historical account of anything, just a miracle. Somehow, all 7 claimants ended up holding the Totem of Tiber Septim at the same time, and each of them got to use the Numidium toward their own goal, simultaneously in the same stretch of days. Whole armies were transported hundreds of miles in what should have been impossible time. Days seemed to merge into one for some observers, while other events played out over a span the 3 actual days couldn't have contained. Earthquakes, firestorms, and titanic battles broke out around the bay all at once. When it was over, 44 separate city-states had collapsed down into 4: Sentinel, Daggerfall, Wayrest, and Orsinium, each one now loyal to the Empire, their new borders marked out by scorched, uninhabitable land. The results held. Years later, all 4 kingdoms were widely regarded as having been ordained by the 9, and the region stayed more stable and more unified than it had been at any point in its recorded history. Manimarco used his share of the event to complete his own transformation into a god, becoming what he would later be called the Revenant. The Underking appears to have gotten what he wanted too, though at a cost. Both he and the Numidium seem to have been destroyed in the process, and an anti-magic zone of unknown location was reportedly left behind. Compared to the Middle Dawn, the warp in the west is unusually clean to describe, because it essentially boils down to one plain idea. Every possible outcome of a single unresolved conflict happened at once, all the way through to completion, and then the world simply picked one summarized version of events to settle into afterward, the same way the 7 candidates for the totem all somehow won. The parallel to the games themselves is direct and openly acknowledged. The warp in the West corresponds to the multiple possible endings of an earlier game in the series, and the explanation given wasn't to pick one as the official outcome, it was that all of them happened. Everything covered so far describes a world that got fixed in place at convention and has kept springing small leaks in that fix ever since. Dragon breaks, time wounds, objects like the Elder Scrolls that refuse to hold a single answer. The Sijic Endeavor is the name given to a deliberate plan built around those leaks, aimed at mortals, not gods. The endeavor is described as a process by which mortals are charged with transcending the gods that created them. That phrase, transcending the gods, is doing exactly what it sounds like it's doing. The goal is for a mortal to become greater than, or at least equal to, the beings that made Mundus in the first place. It breaks down into 2 goals. The first is attaining the tower, which in this context means attaining divinity while still standing on Nirn, without leaving the mortal world behind to do it. The second goal is what comes after, what an individual is actually supposed to do once they have reached that point. Since reaching, it's treated as only the beginning of the real question. According to Morwyn's own traditions, the Kemer learned the rules of the endeavor directly from 2 Daedric princes, Boetia and Mephala, who took it on themselves to teach a specific people how to outgrow the gods who had made them. The endeavor is described as closely tied to Lorkhan specifically, which lines up with everything already covered about him, a god remembered, across nearly every culture, as the one who built Mundus as a place where mortals might eventually equal or surpass their makers. There's a naming coincidence worth clearing up here. because it trips people up constantly. The Sijic Endeavor isn't the same thing as the Sijic Order, the group of ancient mystics based on the island of Artaeum. Both names trace back to the same root word, an old name tied to Padomai. But the Sijic Order itself, as an organization, is on record as not caring much for the idea of the Endeavor. Sharing a root word isn't the same as sharing a goal, and the games never treat the two as interchangeable. The stated goal of the Endeavor is to experience Kim, a state covered in full a little further into this video. The two ideas are described as closely related. Kim is, in effect, the mechanism by which the first goal of the Endeavor, attaining the tower, actually gets carried out. Everything from here through the rest of Part 3, 6 specific methods, called the walking ways, is really just an expansion of this one idea. Mortals are supposed to be able to do what the gods did, without paying the same price the gods paid to do it. The walking ways are described as 6 interrelated methods for reaching godhood, attaining a mantle, a specific role or position within the divine, and with it a state of transcendence free from both the rules, the Aedra locked in at convention, and the corrupting influence of oblivion. Each way is described as a formula that lets a mortal return, even briefly, to the raw state that existed at the very first meeting of Anu and Padomai, back before the Orbis had settled into anything fixed, when pure possibility was still on the table the way it was for the gods before their own convention locked them into place. That comparison to the gods isn't incidental, it's the whole point of the ways existing. Ascending by any of the 6 methods can destabilize Mundus and the wider orbis around the person attempting it, the same way Mundus itself became unstable when the original gods poured themselves into building it. But the framework insists there's one crucial difference. Someone who successfully completes a walking way is described as free of the disaster that afflicted the original gods. They get to keep standing in Mundus and use their new power without threatening the physical stability of the mortal world or breaking its linear timeline the way the god's presence once did. All 6 ways are described as protean, built around an inherent, constant capacity for transformation, and each one is said to represent one of 6 fundamental ways that change actually gets worked on Nirn. That's why they fall under the Sijic Endeavor covered in the last chapter. The Endeavor is the overall plan, and the 6 ways are the 6 different technical routes toward carrying it out. The 6 are named in order: the Numidium, the Endeavor, the Prolix Tower, Kim, the Enantiomorph, and the Scarab. An unofficial text by Michael Kirkbride, The Love Letter from the 5th Era, lists them slightly differently and more plainly still: the Numidium, the Endeavor, the Prolix Tower, Khayyam, the Enantiomorph, the Scarab that transforms into the new man. That line isn't treated as a valid primary source on its own, since it comes from outside the games, but the wiki notes it anyway because it lays the 6 out about as clearly as anything official does. Each of the 6 gets tied to a specific historical figure or group who's said to have walked it, and each gets a full chapter of its own, starting now. The first of the 6 is named directly after the machine already covered twice in this video, the Numidium, also called the Brass Tower or Walk Brass. Vivek himself is on record describing it as the wrong walking path, the route Dagoth ultimately followed. The mechanics of it trace straight back to the heart of Lorkhan and the machines the Dwemer built to tap it. Any mortal, according to the framework, could in theory reach godhood this way, by drawing on the heart's power directly or through a stand-in for it. Manimarco is the clearest example already covered. He used a manufactured substitute for the heart, the mantella, and the resulting surge of power, sometimes called the second Numidian effect, was enough to push him into godhood as the figure later known as the Revenant. Various heretical cults across the empire including scattered remnants of the same Marukadi selective responsible for the Middle Dawn, hold this way in particular reverence, viewing repeated use of the Numidium as a tool for pushing past the limits of what one source calls the Grey, maybe reality itself, under one of its other names. According to some accounts, Wulfhart also reached godhood by this same path. Tiber Septim's own use of the Numidium sits close to this way as well, even though his eventual divinity as Talos is more commonly credited to different methods covered in a later chapter. It was Tiber's battle mage, Zurin Arctus, who built the Mantella in the first place, using either his own life force or, in a disputed account, the soul of Wulfhart to replace the heart of Lorcan that the original machine had needed. That version of the Numidium walked twice, once to finish Tiber's conquest of Tamriel at Rimmon in Elsewhere, and once more, centuries later, as the trigger for the warp in the west. Both activations are on record as producing a dragon break. Dagoth Ur's attempt to build a second version, Akulakan, using the actual heart instead of a substitute, followed the same basic logic, and was only stopped when the Nerevarine severed Kagernak's bindings on the heart in the Third Era, 427. The framework treats this way as powerful but dangerous, not just difficult. One source close to Sota Sil's Clockwork Apostles calls the Numidium the most profane thing the Dwemer ever built, a walking horror, and a welded knot at the center of Anu that must be untied, language that treats the machine less like a tool and more like an open wound in the fabric of reality. That's consistent with everything else already covered. Every documented use of the Numidium across every era has been followed by exactly the kind of large-scale, reality-bending disruption a dragon break represents. Whatever this way grants, it doesn't seem to come cheap for the world around the person using it, even when it succeeds for the person walking it. The second walking way shares its name with the larger plan it serves. Vivek describes it as a sword the size of an ancient road, the long, difficult journey an enemy sets in front of a person, which that person chooses to walk anyway. It's tied directly to the trials a hero goes through, the tests and hardships that, in the framework's own words, cut a person into a better shape and, through that process, open the door to godhood. Vivek names the clearest example of this way as the Nerevarine, and by extension Nerevar himself, whose whole story, exile, war, betrayal, prophecy, and the long road the Nerevarine eventually walks to fulfill it, is treated as a direct demonstration of what this way actually looks like in practice. It isn't a shortcut. It's the entire arc of a hero's life used as the mechanism. This particular way is held in special regard in Morrowind specifically, tracing back to Veloth's original exodus out of Somerset Isle and the founding of the Sigic endeavor itself. Boethiah is credited with showing Veloth and his followers the correct way to walk that exodus through pain, which sets up a pattern that repeats throughout Dunmer religious thought. Transcendence through a hard journey, not around one. According to some sources, Hjalti Earlybeard, one of Tiber Septim's own names, from before his rise, also reached godhood through this way. Set against the machinery of the first way, the second way is almost deliberately old-fashioned. There's no artifact involved, no device to build or activate. It's simply the oldest kind of story there's, a hard road, walked all the way to the end, reframed as one of the 6 actual, functioning mechanisms by which a mortal can become a god. The third way is described as word of action, using speech and writing to explore what would otherwise be hysteria, without fear, and through that exploration, actually reshaping the rules the world runs on. It's tied to the earth bones, the natural laws set down back at convention, and to every known method of bending those laws through language. The Thum, used by Dragonborn and the Greybeards, the practice of spinning, associated with the Bosmer of Valenwood, the towers themselves, and tonal architecture, the discipline the Dwemer used to build things like the Numidium in the first place. Anyone who successfully reaches godhood through this way is described as capable of substituting one natural law for another without consequence, even when those laws directly contradict each other. That's a fairly precise definition of what a tower is already shown to do throughout this video. White gold reshaping Cyrodiil's climate, the Middle Dawn splitting time into 8 pieces, Greensap collapsing multiple true endings down into one. The third way is, in effect, the claim that a person can learn to do personally what a tower does structurally. The Spinners of Valenwood are named as the group who hold this way in the highest regard, which fits with the Bosmer's own tower, Greensap, being grown, not built, and defined by its ability to tell more than one true story at once. According to some sources, the figure known as Ysmir attained godhood by this exact way, and the title itself supports the connection directly, since Ysmir has historically been a name granted by the Greybeards, the practitioners of the Way of the Voice, to anyone who can withstand the full force of their own Thum. Between the 3 ways covered so far, a pattern is already starting to take shape. The first way runs through a physical machine built around a stolen divine heart. The second way runs through nothing but a long, hard road walked to the end. The third way runs through the deliberate, controlled use of language itself as a kind of lever against reality. 3 completely different methods, according to the framework, arriving at the same destination. The fourth way is called Kim, sometimes described as the steps of the dead, and it's the one the whole rest of this video keeps circling back to, because nearly every other claim about moral divinity in Elder Scrolls lore eventually routes back through it. Kim as a word comes from Elnofex, the oldest language attested in the setting, and it's described as a sigil connoting royalty, starlight, and high splendor, the secret syllable of royalty. Specifically, in its proper written form, the sigil is said to look like a crown tower, which collapses down to a single letter, I. Scholars who can actually perceive its shape describe it as dangerous to even look at, a form that threatens to come apart the instant a person's concentration slips. The process it names is described as a proper comprehension of what it actually means to be mortal, reached by willingly submitting to pain. Vivek, who teaches this way more directly than almost anyone else in the setting, compares the experience to the trauma of being struck with a mace or a hammer, and to something stranger still, a hostage learning to savor the exact wound they receive, treating their own suffering as a punishment simply for being mortal in the first place. The release that follows that submission is described as opening onto a simultaneous comprehension of the full scope of existence, everything at once, which is exactly the danger. A person who reaches that point risks losing their own individuality entirely, dissolving into the flood of understanding instead of surviving it with a self still intact. The framework built up around this way gives that danger a more precise shape. Reaching this state involves what's called a right reaching, turning what's described as a triangle truth on its side to pierce directly into the heart of the beginning place, the birthplace of every spirit that exists. Doing this recreates, in miniature, the exact moment Anu and Padome first met and produced the raw, chaotic possibility that the whole Arbis grew out of. Vivek describes what a person actually feels at that moment as the relentless alien terror of God being submerged in the raw material of creation itself and experiencing, all at once, both the boundless scale of the Godhead and one's own place inside it, a place that turns out to be everywhere, and therefore, in a practical sense, nowhere at all. For most people who reach that point, the realization is total. Their sense of being a separate individual dissolves into the surrounding flux, a state called zero-sum, and their body itself is said to disintegrate into vapor or ash. They don't come back from it. A small number of people, according to this same framework, manage something different. They submerge into that same raw understanding and somehow hold onto their own sense of self anyway, refusing to let the flood erase them. And it's that specific act of refusal, staying whole while seeing the whole, that actually constitutes Kim. The person who survives it becomes a god without ever needing to leave near. This same body of teaching describes the resulting state using an image borrowed from ordinary sleep. It calls it divine hypnagogia after the drowsy transition between being awake and being asleep, and compares it to lucid dreaming. Someone in this state exists simultaneously in the ordinary, linear world mortals live in, and in a timeless, dreamlike layer where the gods themselves are said to reside, asleep in the sense of being outside of ordinary time but still fully active, pulling the invisible strings that run through mundus. Living gods reached through KIM are described as able to die in the ordinary sense and simply choose to wake up again afterward, unless their connection to that deeper, dreaming layer is severed entirely, in which case death becomes final. Vivek calls the sigil of KIM the secret syllable of royalty, and states plainly that learning it's essential to becoming what he calls a ruling king. Someone who reaches it through this specific way is described as doing more than simply observing the tower from a distance. They're said to actually live inside it. Described in the teaching as writing with black hands, an image that deliberately echoes Mephala, the Daedric prince associated with theory and murder in equal measure, whose own hands are described the same way. Where Vivek learned this secret is one of the clearest examples in this entire video of the three-layer rule doing real work. Vivek himself claims he learned the secret syllable directly from Molag Bal. Other accounts, separate from that claim, say the true source of his divinity had nothing to do with Molag Bal at all, and came instead from direct contact with the heart of Lorcan, whose power is said to have burned his hands black in the process. The same black hands the Kim teaching describes as the mark of someone living inside the tower rather than merely looking at it. Both explanations exist in the sources. Neither cancels the other out. Vivek is a poet god on record as an unreliable narrator, even by his own followers' admission, so a claim from his own sermon sits, by the standard set at the start of this video, in the second layer, an in-world claim from someone who might not be telling the whole truth, even about himself. Kirkbride's own unofficial writing gives the underlying mechanism a plainer name, dawn-making. By this account, reaching Kim means blurring the line between the ordinary waking world and the timeless dreaming layer where the gods reside, producing a brief eruption of pure orbis, the same raw, uncommitted possibility that existed before convention ever locked the world into place. That eruption is, by this same account, exactly what a dragon break actually is, mechanically speaking. Linear time briefly collapsing back into the acausal chaos of the dawn era, triggered by a mortal successfully reenacting a divine pattern strongly enough to seize its power for themselves. Framed that way, Kim isn't simply a personal, private state of enlightenment. It's described as an act with consequences that ripple outward into the wider structure of history, which is exactly the connective thread running underneath every dragon break already covered in this video. Official and unofficial both. The fifth way has the least intuitive name of the six, but the underlying pattern is simple once it's laid out. Vivek describes it as the lover left without a double, and the whole idea traces straight back to Anu and Padomai, the two primal forces already covered, whose interaction produced everything else in the Orbis. An enantiomorph, in this framework, is what happens when two individuals, called the king and the rebel, become linked through something or someone that both of them want. That shared object of desire is called the lover. Once the link forms, the king and the rebel effectively become interchangeable, two faces of a single deeper pattern, until one of them wins and claims the resulting godhood for themselves. The outcome is always decided by a third figure, the witness, who's blinded or maimed in the course of the clash between the other two. Vivek claims to have gone through this pattern more than once, in more than one role. He describes himself as the victor in his own enantiomorph against Mephala, with his own mother serving as the blinded witness. Separately, he claims that Nervar's later incarnation, the Nervarine, and Dagoth formed an enantiomorph of their own. The Nervarine eventually decided the victor, with Vivek himself standing as witness to that outcome. The most famous example by far, though, involves two figures already covered at length in this video, Talos and Zurin Arctus. Vivek's own sermons describe seeing, long before either man rose to prominence, a vision of a two-headed ruling king with no true equal, calling the figure the red jewel of conquest. That vision described General Talos and his battle mage Zurin Arctus together, bound as one entity through the crown, both of them in different ways ended up wearing. According to at least one member of the Marukati Selective, the resulting fused entity, the combined oversoul of both men, was known to the wider world simply as Tiber Septim. Zurin Arctus also shared a title with Wulfarth, the Underking, which tangles the pairing further still, since some accounts of the Numidium's activation describe Arctus using his own life force to power the Mantella, and others describe him using Wulfarth's instead. What actually happened to Zurin Arctus after Tiber's conquest depends entirely on which account is being followed. The more commonly repeated version has him trying to reclaim his own heart from inside the Mantella after objecting to further use of the Numidium, being destroyed alongside the machine in the attempt, and surviving afterward as an undead figure unable to fully die, the Underking. A separate, heretical version instead has him dying earlier, in the act of trapping Wulfar's soul, with the undead figure who later destroys the Numidium actually being Wulfarth wearing Arctus's old title. According to some sources following the framework of this way specifically, it was Zurin Arctus, not Talos, who ended up the ultimate victor of the pairing and the one who actually reached godhood through it, which would make Talos' own far more famous, far more widely worshipped divinity the less metaphysically important half of the same event. This way is held in particular regard by cults scattered across Cyrodiil, including, again, remnants of the Marukati Selective, and by the followers of a shadowy figure known only as the Prophet. Anu and Padome remain the original template underneath all of it, two forces locked together through their shared connection to a third, with the entire subsequent history of the Orbis effectively serving as the outcome of that first ancient contest. Every later enantiomorph, on this account, is simply that same original shape playing out again at a smaller, mortal scale. The sixth and final way carries the least written detail of the six, but its core idea is the most straightforward. Many individuals joining together and becoming, in a functional sense, one. It's named the Scarab, and it draws its name from actual scarab beetles, which roll dung into a ball far larger than themselves. Astrolothurges, scholars who study the meaning of the stars, take a particular interest in it. Its clearest documented demonstration comes from the tribunal, who joined together to destroy the soul of the Dwemer as a people, stealing 3 specific qualities from what's called the walking star in the process: its fire, its mystery, and its feet. A separate legend tied to Boethia and Trinimac describes Malakath and his followers being balled together into a single sphere, in the story's own words. As the scarab gathers dung, many individual orcs compress down into one collective mass by the same underlying pattern. The symbol and the name are both tied directly to Lorcan specifically, which places this way, like the first, in close relation to the missing god, not at a remove from him. Scarab imagery carried particular weight in both Dwemer and Dunmer culture historically. The black scarab in particular served as the symbol of House Redoran, one of the great houses of Morrowind. According to some sources, the Emperor himself, whether that means the specific office, the wider Septim dynasty, or the Empire as a whole, depending on which source is doing the naming, attained godhood through this exact way. Given that the tribunal's demonstration of the pattern involved many individuals joining as one, this is generally taken to point towards something called the Oversoul of Emperors, a kind of collective divine continuity running underneath the entire line of Septim rulers, of which Tiber Septim is considered the clearest embodiment. With all 6 ways now laid out, the framework's own internal logic becomes easier to see as a whole, a machine built on a stolen heart, a long road walked to its end. Language bent hard enough to substitute one law of reality for another, a private, near-fatal confrontation with the true structure of the universe. 2 rivals fused by a shared desire into a single interchangeable pattern, many individuals folded down into one. 6 completely different shapes, according to every source that lists them, all said to open onto the exact same destination, a mortal standing where a god once stood, without paying the price the original gods paid to get there. With all 6 ways laid out, it helps to run the actual names against them and see what's stated plainly and what only comes from a single unofficial source. Vivek is the clearest case, because he's the only one of the 6 who describes his own path in his own words, across a body of teaching large enough to have an entire wiki article summarizing it. He claims divinity through Kim, learned, by his own account, from Molagbal, though other sources trace the same divinity to direct contact with the heart of Lorcan instead, leaving his hands burned black. He separately claims an enantiomorph against Mephala, with his own mother serving as witness, and a second enantiomorph pairing the Nerevarine against Dagoth Ur, with himself standing as witness that time. Whether all of these claims can be literally true at once, or whether Vivek is simply telling the same underlying truth several different ways depending on who's listening, is never settled by the sources, and Vivek's own reputation as an unreliable narrator, openly acknowledged even within Dunmer tradition, means none of it can be taken as flatly proven fact, rather than a poet god's own account of himself. Almalexia and Sota Sil reached godhood alongside Vivek through the same event, all 3 using Kagranak's tools to draw power from the heart of Lorcan at Red Mountain, which ties their shared godhood most directly to the first way. Temple doctrine offers a very different account, insisting the tribunal earned their divinity through virtue, discipline, and questing, not through the heart at all. The tribunal's own members, on record in their own sermons, acknowledge that ultimately it was the heart's power that made them true gods, whatever their private discipline may have also earned them. Sotha Sil in particular spent his divine centuries building the clockwork city around a belief, held by his followers, the clockwork apostles, that Anu is the sole true reality, and Padome merely an illusion, a belief that would, if followed to its own logical end, dissolve the very distinction the 6 walking ways are built on. Talos is the most widely worshipped of the group, and also the most contested. As Tiber Septim, he's said to have ascended to Aetherius on his death in the Third Era, 38, becoming the ninth of the divines. The exact method is disputed even within the sources that accept his divinity at all. Some point to the second way, the long, hard road of his own military campaign. Others point to the fourth, Kim itself. The fifth way, the enantiomorph, complicates the picture further still, since Talos is described as fused with his battle mage Zurin Arctus into a single interchangeable pattern, and at least one source claims it was Arctus, not Talos, who was the pairing's true victor. Wulfhart, tangled into the same story through his shared title with Arctus, is separately credited by some sources with reaching godhood through the first way, using the Numidium directly. Manimarco offers the cleanest, least disputed case in the entire list, precisely because it happened recently enough and publicly enough to be documented, not mythologized. He used a manufactured substitute for the Heart of Lorcan, the Mantella, during the warp in the west, and the resulting surge of power pushed him into godhood as the Revenant, a straightforward run through the first way, confirmed by multiple independent accounts of the same event, rather than resting on a single character's own claim about himself. Dagoth-Ur sits differently from the rest, because nobody, including Vivek, treats his path as a successful one. He's called the False Dreamer, tied to the Heart of Lorcan the same way the Tribunal was, and his attempt to build a second Numidium, Akulachan, followed the logic of the first way, right up until the Nerevarine cut it short. Vivek's own teaching describes him as the necessary opposite number in Nerevar's own path to becoming a ruling king, the thing that has to be stood against and understood, not walked past. Running down this list, one honest pattern holds up across nearly every name on it. The strongest, most detailed accounts of who walked which way and how come from exactly two kinds of sources. Either they come from Vivek himself, an in-world poet god on record as being willing to lie or speak in riddles even to his own followers, which places them squarely in the second layer set out earlier in this video, or they come from Michael Kirkbride's unofficial writing, or from wiki text built by summarizing that writing, which places them in the third. The events themselves, the Battle of Red Mountain, Tiber Septim's conquest, the warp in the west, are attested in the games directly. Which specific walking way each god supposedly used to get theirs, in nearly every single case, a claim resting on a source this video has already flagged as one that might not be telling the whole truth. Kim is described across every source that discusses it as only the first goal of the Siegic endeavor, attaining the tower while still standing in Mundus. What comes after, that's a separate, rarer, and far less documented state called Amaranth. The clearest official description of it comes from the article on the walking ways itself, which describes Amaranth as involving mantling the Godhead and dreaming in the same way as Anu, the previous Amaranth, leading to an exodus from the existing Orbis. Put plainly, reaching Kim means becoming a god who can still live inside the world. Reaching Amaranth means becoming something closer to what the Godhead itself is described as being, a being whose dreaming is the world, instead of a being who simply lives well inside one. And getting there means leaving this Arbis behind entirely, not staying in it the way a Kim state god does. Kirkbride's own unofficial writing in a text called The Love Letter from the Fifth Era expands on this idea well beyond what the official entry states outright, and it needs to be flagged plainly as exactly that, unofficial, developer-written material outside any released game, not a claim the games themselves have made. According to that text, Amaranth is a state reached through love specifically, distinct from the pain-based process that defines Kim. The love letter frames it as the true purpose of Tamriel underneath everything else covered in this video, not simply another rung on the ladder of divinity, but the actual reason the ladder exists in the first place. The unofficial framework built up around mantling describes the mechanism in more technical terms as well. Reaching Kim is described there as a kind of dawn-making, blurring the line between the ordinary, linear world and the timeless dreaming layer where the gods reside, in a way that produces a dragon break as a side effect. Amaranth, by the same account, is what happens when a person goes further still and does what Anu himself is said to have already done once. Stop merely visiting that dreaming layer and start dreaming an entirely new orbis from within it, the way the current orbis is dreamed by whatever the Godhead actually is. Nobody in the setting, official or unofficial, is confirmed to have actually reached this state. Every account of the 6 walking ways stops at Kim. Amaranth exists, in every source that discusses it, as a further theoretical step past the last confirmed achievement in the entire body of lore this video has covered, described in detail by exactly one former developer's outside writing, gestured at in exactly one short paragraph of official text, and never once shown happening on screen in any released game. Kirkbride has written about it directly, more than once, in forum posts that stay unofficial, no matter how often they get quoted. Asked directly whether something exists beyond Kim, he answered, "There is one step beyond Kim, but you're right in that it is not godhood. It's the flowering of a statehood where the images you give birth to in your dream, stolen from first dreamer, wakes up, wails knowing free will, and begins to dream in the same way. Children of liberty without end, and then the music lives forever, as a pirate radio tuned against the rules of heaven and the vulgarities of hell." In a separate post laying out what he called the mechanics of Amaranth, he described the actual moment of transition in similarly strange terms. Anyone that can make the final jump goes to sleep and dreams forever, making a new cosmos and being each new part of it, watching as those new parts wake up within him or her, their actualizing children, some of which naturally rebel, but love begets love, which is the Amaranth. None of that's official lore. It's one writer's own attempt to describe a state he himself called the hardest concept he had ever tried to put into words. By that same writer's own account, nobody has actually done it. Asked point blank whether Talos or Vivek, the 2 figures most commonly assumed to have gone all the way, had reached Amaranth, Kirkbride answered plainly that there was no evidence either one had. If they had, in his words, Tamriel would be in their rearview mirror, meaning an Amaranth entity, by definition, leaves its old Arbis behind entirely, rather than continuing to rule a city or wear a crown inside it. In a later post responding to fans hunting for a loophole answer, he added one more twist that never gets resolved: that something, some being or idea, may already have achieved Amaranth without ever being identified by name, sitting unnoticed inside the very sources this video has already covered. That claim was never confirmed, walked back, or explained further. It simply sits there, exactly the way the post said it does. The Walking Ways article states this part directly, without hedging. To attain Amaranth, a person has to cut off the black hands that represent Kim in the first place. That detail lands with real weight once the earlier chapter on Kim is kept in mind. The whole state of Kim is described as living inside the tower and writing with black hands, an image tied directly to Mephala, the Daedric prince, whose own hands are described the same way. Those black hands aren't a side effect of reaching Kim. They're stated to be, in some sense, the actual mark of the state, the visible sign of a person who has learned to work reality the way Mephala works theory and murder, through their own two hands. So the requirement for the next step past Kim is to give up the very tool that Kim itself provided. A person can't carry the thing that got them into the tower and also walk further past it. Whatever grip on reality those black hands represent, the capacity to act, to argue, to shape events through direct will, has to be released before Amaranth becomes possible at all. Kirkbride's own graphic novel, C0DA, covered fully in a later chapter, dramatizes exactly this idea in about as literal a way as a story can. Its main character has both of his hands physically amputated as part of his own path toward the ending the story is building to. The Walking Ways article adds one more warning on top of that, stated just as plainly as the first. This process shouldn't be attempted alone, lest you repeat the mistakes of those before you. That line points forward to the next chapter directly, because there's exactly one figure in the entire body of Elder Scrolls lore who's widely believed to have already tried something like this and failed, and the reasons why are the single most argued over question in the setting's entire mythology. The failure being pointed toward is called, in the Walking Ways article's own words, the worlding of the words, and it belongs to Lorcan. The claim, stated as plainly as the sources allow, is this: the ultimate goal of the Walking Ways was never simply attaining the tower. It was always the further step, Amaranth, the thing chapter 23 just covered. Lorcan is believed to have attempted that further step and failed at it. Why he failed is, in the article's own phrasing, the subject of intense disagreement and bloodshed from the dawn of creation to the present day. That isn't a throwaway line. Actual wars and actual deaths across multiple eras and multiple cultures trace back in part to different groups holding different answers to this one question. The disagreement breaks down into three basic positions, and the sources refuse to rank them. Some accounts hold that Lorcan simply made a mistake, that he attempted something genuinely beyond him and failed the way anyone might fail at something too large to control. Other accounts hold that the failure was rooted in malice, that whatever Lorcan was actually trying to do, he was willing to do serious harm to achieve it, and the failure is really just the visible wreckage of a plan that was never good faith to begin with. A third position, credited specifically to Vivek, takes a stranger shape, that Lorcan seemed to suspect his own failure would be useful precisely because it failed, a deliberate demonstration built so that later mortals attempting the same thing would know what not to do. This lines up with everything Lorcan is shown to be everywhere else in this video. He talked the Aedra into building Mundus in the first place. He's remembered, across essentially every culture in the setting, by a different local name: Shor, Sep, Shazar, Lorcaj, but always as the same basic figure. A trickster creator whose actions cost the other gods dearly and who was ultimately punished for it, his heart torn out and hurled across the world at convention. If the framework covered in the last two chapters is taken at face value, that same figure didn't stop trying after convention. He's described as reaching the very border of the Arbis, encountering the tower directly and making what this framework treats as the first ever attempt at Kim, and, going further still, at what lies past it. He failed. Whatever he was actually reaching for, he didn't get there. And the argument over whether that failure was an honest accident, a deliberate betrayal, or a lesson built on purpose has never been settled, in-world or out of it, by any source this video has access to. One more piece belongs in this part of the video, and it stays deliberately small, because the research behind it's thin and the connection to everything else here shouldn't be oversold. The dream sleeve is described as the place where souls go to be wiped clean and recycled, a kind of terminal recycling point somewhere in the structure of the afterlife, distinct from the various named heavens like Sovngarde or the far shores that different cultures send their honored dead to. Souls that end up there aren't simply resting or waiting. They're erased and then reused, folded back into the raw material the setting draws new souls from, instead of being preserved as a continuing individual the way souls in Aetherius generally are. The reason it belongs in this part of the video, briefly, is the same reason chapter 2 of this video opened with the first dreamer in the first place. A universe where minds can be wiped and reused sits uncomfortably close to a universe that's itself somebody else's dream. A dream where individual details can, presumably, be revised or discarded the way a dreamer forgets and reinvents pieces of a dream from one night to the next. That's a resonance, not a proof. Nothing in the source material directly states that the dream sleeve exists because the Arbis is a dream, or that the two ideas were designed to comment on each other. The connection is worth naming plainly and then leaving alone, rather than building more on top of it than the thin research here actually supports. Nearly everyone discussed so far in this video who reached some form of divinity did it by staying close to Nirn, ruling a city, wielding a machine, walking a hard road on the mortal world itself. A much smaller group did something different. They left entirely before Mundus was even finished being built, and by most accounts, they're the only beings in the entire setting who can be said to have successfully gotten out. Magnus was the architect of Mundus during the Great Construction, the spirit responsible for the actual design work behind Lorcan's original idea. Partway through the project, watching the toll it was taking on the spirits pouring themselves into the effort, Magnus decided to stop. He left, and in leaving, tore a hole in the fabric of the young universe on his way out, a hole that became the sun, letting a flood of raw magic pour into the newly forming world. He didn't leave alone. A large number of the Etada who had been working alongside him chose to follow him out rather than stay and finish the project. That group became the Magnaga, and their own departure tore further holes in the sky, which became the stars. Where Magnus left one large hole, the Magnaga collectively left thousands of smaller ones, still visible every night as a permanent record of exactly how many spirits chose to go instead of staying. Not every one of the Magnage cut ties completely. A specific smaller group among them, called the Nine Coruscations, followed paths away from Magnus that still let their light keep shining down onto Mundus, meaning they kept some form of ongoing connection to and interaction with the world they had technically abandoned. The rest simply left, becoming part of the general population of stars, without any further stated relationship to the world below them. One of those stars gets singled out by name more than any other. Mnemoli, also called Mnemoli the Blue Star, said to be the most well-known of the Magnage and one of the 9 Coruscations who kept some form of ongoing connection to Mundus after leaving it. She's tied specifically to dragon breaks, bright enough to be seen in the daytime sky during the Middle Dawn, and to the keeping of the Elder Scrolls, with some texts crediting her and her kind with collecting all the songs made by mortals. One thread of her own background loops directly back to a name from earlier in this video. Some sources describe her as having been retroactively built by Sotha Sil, who's said to have personally given her the name Memory, so that some piece of himself might survive his own death at Almalexia's hands. That's the same Memory who appears as a character late in C0DA, telling Jubal in his own private conversation with her on the ruined surface of Nirn that she's leaving and won't tell anyone else what she said. Set against everything else in this video, towers built to hold reality in place. Walking ways designed to let a mortal become a god without paying the price the original gods paid. An amaranth that supposedly requires cutting off the very hands that got a person that far. Magnus and the Magna Gay represent the one clean exception to the entire pattern. They didn't fight for divinity, walk a hard road, or submit to any of the 6 ways. They simply declined to finish what they had started, left before the price came due, and by leaving, became the only beings in the setting whose exit from the Arbis is treated as an accomplished fact rather than a theory, a claim, or a goal still waiting to be reached. Everything covered so far in this video is theory, myth, or a claim made by a character about themselves. Mankar Camoran is a worked example, an actual person inside the games who took a specific reading of this whole metaphysical framework and built his entire life around acting on it. Mankar was born into hiding, the son of a woman named Kalis, who fled into the wilderness of High Rock after the Camoran usurper's final defeat. Little is recorded of his early life. What's recorded is that he grew up to worship Myrun's Dagon, the Daedric Prince of Destruction, and that Dagon chose him personally as a mortal champion, handing him an artifact book called the Mysterium Exarchus, written, according to the cult's own account, by Dagon himself. Mankar spent years absorbing that text and recording what he took from it in his own writing, the commentaries on the Mysterium Exarchus, which became the core scripture of the cult he went on to lead, the Mythic Dawn. The belief system Mankar built from that reading is a full, internally consistent alternate account of everything part 2 of this video already covered. Where the standard version has Lorcan as the trickster god who talked the other spirits into building Mundus and was punished for it at convention, Mankar's version inverts the entire story. He held that Lorcan was, in truth, a Daedric prince all along, that Mundus itself was actually Lorcan's own realm of oblivion, misleadingly called Tamriel by the mortals living inside it. Its real name, Dawn's Beauty, and that the Aedra weren't righteous judges enforcing a necessary punishment at convention, but traitors and thieves who stole Lorcan's own realm out from under him and then deliberately cut mortals off from their own divine sparks, so that the Aedra themselves would look like the only possible way back to godhood. In Mankar's own words, recorded from the ritual language of convention itself, the Aedra rendered the mutant bound where he may do no more harm. Let the home of Padome see us as soul exit. Under this reading, Mehrunes Dagon's invasion of Tamriel during the Oblivion Crisis wasn't conquest. It was framed inside the cult's own doctrine as liberation, freeing what Mankar called the occupied lands from their false Aedric rulers. Mankar didn't just preach this, he built a working demonstration of it, using the Mysterium Exarchus as both a key and a gate, and binding himself permanently to the book through what the sources call unholy ritual. He created an entire pocket realm of his own, called Paradise, or Gair Alata. The book itself was, in a real sense, the realm. Mankar served as its anchor the same way a sigil stone anchors an ordinary oblivion gate in place. Despite the name, the realm was only ever a paradise for Mankar and the 2 children he had there. For the followers who joined him, it functioned instead as a prison and a torture chamber, which is its own quiet comment on how well the cult's stated ideals of liberation actually held up in practice once somebody built the thing. Mankar's ultimate goal, carried out through the assassination of Emperor Uriel Septim VII and the Mythic Dawn's broader attacks on the Amulet of Kings, was to break the barrier separating Nirn from Oblivion entirely, letting Mehrunes Dagon's realm merge permanently with the mortal world. He very nearly succeeded, and was stopped only when the hero of Kuwach pursued him directly into paradise and killed him there, at which point the realm, no longer anchored, simply stopped existing. Not every voice inside the setting takes Mankar's metaphysics seriously. A Daedra named Liranth the Fool Killer, on record elsewhere in this lore, dismisses the entire framework outright, mocking the specific claim that Mundus belongs to Dagon by birthright as merely convenient, and questioning whether any of it actually came from Dagon at all, rather than simply being spread by credulous cultists. That's worth holding on to as this video moves into its final stretch. Mankar Camoran is proof that a person inside this world can take the same raw material, Lorcan, convention, the Aedra, the promise of transcendence, and build an entirely different, self-serving, and ultimately monstrous story out of it. The metaphysics itself doesn't settle who's right, it only supplies the pieces. Everything in this chapter needs one label attached to it before a single detail gets described, because none of it has ever appeared in a released Elder Scrolls game, and none of it has a wiki article of its own. It exists only inside Michael Kirkbride's posts and related unofficial writing, forum text, a self-published short story, and a script for a graphic novel that was never fully produced. This is the third layer set out at the start of this video, as unofficial as anything gets, and it needs to be said plainly here, not assumed. The core idea is called landfall, and the clearest description of it comes from a short piece of prose called The Prophet of Landfall, originally written as a birthday gift for Kirkbride's old collaborator Kurt Kuhlman, and later adapted into a comic. It describes a being coming down from mountains, insect-like, its belly freshly painted, walking toward a vast civilization it intends to save, traveling toward what the text calls salvation, certain in its own mind that the people below will eventually abandon their old gods and follow the new faith it carries. Kirkbride later revealed in a follow-up comic released as a prelude to C0DA that this same prophet dies almost immediately after the events of that short piece, killed by the Numidium. That detail connects Landfall to the wider C0DA verse directly. In Kirkbride's own posts, Landfall is described as the specific cataclysm that eventually destroys Nirn outright in the far future setting of C0DA, an apocalyptic return of the Numidium, so total that the survivors, generations later, can only pilgrimage to the ruins of their old world during a narrow window called Landfall Season. Kirkbride has been careful, across multiple posts, to draw a hard line between Landfall and other better-known pieces of Elder Scrolls fiction that share surface similarities. Asked directly whether Landfall was the same as the events described in a separate published novel, he replied flatly, "Totally different thing. When Landfall happens, you guys will do a spit take like Bail Organa did when the Death Star showed up above Alderaan." He has also pushed back, gently but directly, on fans who assumed they already understood exactly what Landfall meant from one poem alone, writing under his own name. I must agree with Lord Maturin. This is not the Landfall you are looking for. By Kirkbride's own account, the planned order of these unreleased or partially released works runs Dies Irae, then the Prophet of Landfall, then Stringendo, then Landfall, Day 1, and finally C0DA itself, which does exist in complete script form and gets covered fully in the next chapter. Of that list, only the Prophet of Landfall material and C0DA were ever actually finished and released, even in an unofficial capacity. The rest remain, by Kirkbride's own later admission, abandoned. None of this is presented anywhere in the sources, as a claim about what will happen in a future Elder Scrolls game. It's a piece of speculative fiction written by a former member of the development team on his own time, outside any studio's official channel, describing one possible far future ending for the world the games are set in. Whatever weight it carries comes entirely from who wrote it and how closely it echoes ideas. Amaranth, dreaming, the Godhead that this video has already traced back to more grounded, if still contested, sources. It has never appeared in a released game, and it shouldn't be mistaken for something that has. C0DA is the one piece of this entire video's third layer that exists as a finished, complete work rather than a scattered set of forum posts and abandoned fragments. Kirkbride wrote the full script and released it, along with some accompanying artwork, on Valentine's Day, 2014. It's set on Masser, one of Nirn's two moons, generations after an apocalyptic event. Landfall, the same cataclysm covered in the last chapter, has destroyed the planet entirely. Surviving Dunmer and Khajiit have built a civilization inside vast tunnels dug by giant worms beneath the moon's surface. The story follows Yubal Lun Sul, a young Dunmer noble who wants to do something worthy of his family's name before he marries into a more prestigious house. The condition his prospective in-laws set for the marriage is close to impossible. He has to kill a Numidium, a task nobody is known to have survived. Jubal's path to that fight runs through most of the framework this video has already laid out, restaged as a personal story rather than an abstract theory. He befriends a version of Vivek who tells him stories from his own life, including an extended detour into a wildly different visual style, a hyper-commercial superhero pastiche in which Vivek, Sota Sil, Almalexia, Molagbal, and Dagoth Ur form a team called Pseudo-6 Taus, fighting a corrupted Numidium inside an endless television dimension. Back in the main story, Jubal makes the decision, before his final confrontation, to have both of his hands amputated, a direct dramatization of the requirement covered earlier in this video that a person seeking to move past Kim has to cut off the black hands that Kim itself granted them. When Jubal finally faces the Numidium, he doesn't fight it in any conventional sense. He talks to it, quoting directly from Sermon 11 of the 36 Lessons of Vivek, "When you approach God, cut both of them off." God has no need of theory, and he's armored head to toe in terror and confronts the machine with the fact that it has no real philosophy behind it at all. Just an entitled teenager's need to keep winning. The Numidium, disarmed by finally being spoken to on its own level, admits exactly that. Jubal defeats it not with a weapon, but with an empty word balloon of his own, meeting its own emptiness with emptiness. Ghostly hands, matching a set of hand-shaped figures that have been breaking the fourth wall throughout the story, replace the ones Jubal gave up. The story ends at his wedding, where the person he's marrying is revealed to be Vivek, and the god Lorcan, presiding over the ceremony as priest, is shown finally healed of the wound in his chest that every version of his story, all the way back to convention, has described him carrying. Kirkbride has been explicit about what he wanted the story to do outside of its own plot. He built C0DA specifically to argue that words like canon and official don't actually apply to how fans get to enjoy Elder Scrolls lore, that the ideas in this video are worth taking seriously on their own terms, whether or not a given studio ever puts its stamp of approval on them. He has compared his own approach to open source software and to improv comedies, Yes, and Principle, and he has said that people who actually worked inside Bethesda game studios shared that same view of how the lore should be treated. A detail from the Elder Scrolls Online, released not long after C0DA came out, has been read by some as a quiet, in-house nod to exactly that idea, though that reading itself comes from Kirkbride's own account of events, not from any official statement by the studio. That combination is what makes C0DA the strangest object in this entire video. Judged purely on how completely it lays out the Godhead, Dreaming, Amaranth, Kim, and the Six Walking Ways as one coherent, worked through story, it's arguably the single most complete statement of this whole theory that exists anywhere in Elder Scrolls material. Judged by the 3-layer rule this video set up at the start, it's also, simultaneously, one of the least official things connected to the franchise, a self-published script, written and released entirely outside any game, by someone whose formal role on the series had ended years before he wrote it. Taking the whole framework at face value for a moment, if the Arbis really is something the Godhead is dreaming, and everyone and everything inside it, gods included, is a character inside that dream, the obvious question is whether any of it actually matters. The setting's own answer to that question, scattered across the sources already covered in this video, is more consistent than the messiness of everything else here might suggest. The plain answer the framework gives is that it doesn't matter, because the dream is the only reality anything inside it will ever have access to. A person suffers real pain, forms real attachments, and dies a real death inside a dream, from the perspective of anyone living inside that dream, whether or not something external to its doing the dreaming. Kirkbride's own unofficial writing makes this explicit. The state of Kim itself is described using the metaphor of dreaming directly, with living gods described as existing simultaneously awake in ordinary linear time and asleep in a timeless divine layer running underneath it, without either state cancelling the other out. Nothing in that description treats the waking layer as less real for being nested inside something larger. More importantly, this isn't just a philosophical stance the setting takes about a dream nobody can check. Chapter 10 already covered proof of exactly this multivalued structure sitting inside the games themselves, no theory required. Elder Scrolls, the actual objects, hold multiple contradictory versions of the same event at once, malleable and uncertain, right up until a hero's actions lock one version into place as history. Dragon breaks are a documented, named category of event in which several different true histories all happen simultaneously before the world settles back into a single continuous thread. The warp in the West is the cleanest example. Every possible outcome of one unresolved conflict happened, all the way through to completion, at the same time, and the world simply continued on from whichever summarized version it landed on. None of that required the Godhead, Dreaming, or any unofficial writing to establish. It's attested directly in the games as the actual behavior of this setting's own history. So what the sources actually support isn't really a metaphysical shrug. It's closer to a demonstrated fact standing behind a metaphysical claim. Whether or not something called the Godhead is dreaming the whole Orbis, the Orbis already behaves like a place where more than one version of the truth can be simultaneously valid, where objects like Elder Scrolls exist specifically to hold that contradiction, and where entire regions of history have already been shown on screen, resolving themselves the exact way a dream resolves once the sleeper wakes and settles on which parts to keep. A small, in-game detail makes the same point in miniature. During the siege of the Imperial City in the Second Era, a unit of soldiers known as the Immortal Eight held a district against overwhelming odds for months, dying repeatedly and simply getting back up each time, a little less like themselves with every death. Nobody in the sources ever fully explains the mechanism behind their survival. One of the soldiers himself offers a guess, on record, that's never confirmed and never denied, that they weren't alive in the ordinary sense at all, but dreaming everything. Whether that guess is literally true is left open. That a common soldier in an ordinary siege could say it, in-game, as a plausible account of his own condition, says something about how deeply this idea runs through the setting at every level, not just at the level of gods and towers. Everything in this video has tried to label its sources honestly as it went. This chapter is where that honesty has to be turned fully on the theory itself, and a fair skeptic's case laid out plainly rather than folded quietly into the corners of earlier chapters. Start with the plainest fact of all. The entire official lore entry on the Godhead runs to roughly 200 words, and even inside that short entry, the entity is explicitly called an esoteric entity of disputed existence. That phrase wasn't inserted by this video for effect. It's the actual language the source material uses to describe its own subject. No released Elder Scrolls game has ever had a character stand in front of a player and use the word Godhead the way fans of this topic typically use it, as a singular, named, dreaming entity underlying the entire setting. The word appears in the games in its other two senses, covered back in Chapter 1, a label for a group of gods or a synonym for the general process of becoming a god. The capital G Cosmic Dreamer is a reading built by combining a handful of scattered references with a much larger body of material that was never in a game at all. That larger body of material is where the second problem sits. The two strongest texts commonly cited in support of the Godhead theory are, first, the teachings of Vivek, and second, Michael Kirkbride's own posts and unofficial writing. Neither one holds up as a neutral, disinterested source under ordinary scrutiny. Vivek is a poet god whose own culture's storytelling tradition, by design, embeds contradiction and unreliable narration. Kirkbride himself has said outright that the Morrowind writing team deliberately built in what he called plausible deniability, so that no single account of in-world events could be taken as flatly, uncomplicatedly true. Vivek's own sermons contradict each other on basic points covered earlier in this video, including the very source of his own divinity. Treating a character explicitly built to be unreliable as the primary authority on the deepest layer of the setting's cosmology is, at minimum, a choice that deserves to be stated out loud, not assumed. Kirkbride's material carries a different but related problem. He's unmatched among Elder Scrolls writers in the sheer volume of lore he has put into the world outside the games, and his official work, the 36 Lessons of Vivek, the Monomyth, decades of in-game books, genuinely shaped the setting from the inside. But the specific material this video has had to label third layer throughout. The love letter, Landfall, C0DA, and the vast majority of his forum posts was written after he had already left Bethesda Softworks on his own platforms, under no obligation to remain consistent with whatever the active development team was doing at the time. He has said as much himself, describing canon and official status as concepts he considers essentially meaningless for how Elder Scrolls lore should be enjoyed. That's an honest, even admirable position for a writer to hold. It also means that a viewer treating his forum posts with the same weight as a line of dialogue from a released game is making a choice the writer himself has openly said he doesn't think should be made. A fair skeptic weighing all of this would say something like, the Godhead is a real idea, present in the setting's DNA, resting on real textual evidence and taken seriously by the people who actually wrote the lore. But it's also, by the source's own admission, unconfirmed, filled in mostly by unofficial material, and dependent on treating an admitted unreliable narrator and a former employee's personal forum posts as authoritative in a way the games themselves have never once done on screen. Both things can be true at once, and this video has tried to keep them both in view the whole way through, rather than picking a side. Even if a viewer walks away from all of that fully unconvinced, if the Godhead itself gets thrown out entirely as too speculative, too dependent on unofficial writing, too built on an unreliable narrator's own claims about himself, everything else covered in this video still stands on its own, verified directly by the games. The towers are real, attested structures inside the setting, not a theory about them. White Gold Tower sits in the middle of the Imperial City in every mainline game that features Cyrodiil. Red Mountain has erupted multiple times on screen, with documented, playable consequences each time. The Adamantine Tower stands on Balfiera exactly where the lore says it does. None of that depends on whether a Godhead is dreaming any of it. The Elder Scrolls are real, in-game objects with a documented, demonstrated behavior, contents that shift and blur before a prophecy resolves, then lock permanently into place once it does. Dragon breaks are a real, named, in-world category of event, discussed by in-world historians using their own terminology, with at least two confirmed occurrences, the Middle Dawn and the Warp in the West, backed by conflicting eyewitness accounts that themselves prove the setting's history isn't single-valued. Mantling, and becoming a god more generally, are attested repeatedly and specifically as documented processes. Tiber Septim's rise to become the god Talos, worshipped as the ninth of the divines, happened in the games and is treated as settled fact within the setting's own religious institutions. Whatever dispute remains over exactly which walking way got him there. The Tribunal, Vivek, Almalexia, and Sotha-Sil ruled Morrowind as living gods for centuries, a documented historical fact of the setting confirmed by their direct, playable presence in Morrowind itself. Manimarco's transformation into the Revenant during the Warp in the West is corroborated by multiple independent accounts rather than resting on any single character's claim about themselves. The 6 walking ways, as a described framework of methods, sit in the second layer of this video's own rule, an in-world teaching, not a developer's forum post, and the events they're built to explain, the Battle of Red Mountain, Tiber Septim's conquest, the Warp in the West, all happen in the games regardless of which specific way a given source credits for each one. Talos, the Tribunal, and Manimarco aren't the only names on the list either. High Rock myth holds that Arcade started out as an ordinary shopkeeper named Arcade, who found a book about life and death, spent his own life studying it, and rose to godhood on his deathbed. An Arcane priest centuries later taught the same story as settled doctrine. The Altmer god Xarxes has his own version of it, tied to a mortal priest of the same name who served Ariel and was elevated for it. Sirabane, one of the Altmeri god ancestors, gets described both as a first-era archmage and as a god already worshipped by the Falmer before that mage's own lifetime, which most doctrine just accepts rather than tries to explain. Finaster is said to have had more than one mortal life, one of whom died at the hands of a common criminal gang, with each death folded into the same ongoing godhood. None of these come from Kirkbride. They're standard in-world religious teaching, the kind printed in in-game books, and they say the same thing from 4 different directions. In this setting, a person becoming a god isn't a one-time miracle. It's a documented, repeatable category of event. Strip the Godhead entirely out of this video, in other words, and there's still a setting where towers hold reality together, where scrolls contain more truth than any single reading can hold, where time itself has broken and resumed more than once on record, and where at least 3 named individuals are, by the direct testimony of the games themselves, gods now. The strange, unsettled part of Elder Scrolls cosmology covered in this video's first 3 parts doesn't actually depend on the most disputed claim inside it turning out to be true. Everything up to this point has come from the research, labeled by which of the 3 layers it sits in. This last part doesn't. It's a personal reading of the pattern, not a fact, and it should be taken as exactly that. The same shape keeps showing up at every size in this material. At the largest size, Anu and Padomai never actually finish their fight. The Arbis is described as the ongoing record of that struggle, not its resolution, and Vivek's own teaching treats the whole structure as something built and unbuilt, rather than something settled once. At a smaller size, Dragon Breaks do the same thing on a human timescale, several true histories running at once, then collapsing down into one, then starting forward again. The warp in the West and the Middle Dawn aren't one-off miracles under that reading. They're the exact same event that supposedly made the universe, playing out again in miniature, inside a single region, over a few months instead of an age. And at the smallest size, C0DA ends with a wound that has been open since convention finally closing, at a wedding, on a moon that only exists because the original world got destroyed, followed immediately, in Kirkbride's own account, by the birth of a new set of consequences for whoever comes next. If that pattern is real and not a coincidence of which stories happen to survive, then the Godhead waking up might not be a single future event the setting is building toward. It might be something closer to a habit the setting can't stop repeating, at whatever scale is available to it, every time something breaks badly enough. Nothing in the research proves that. It's just the shape that kept appearing, chapter after chapter, while this video was being put together. That's the shape of it. A 200-word official entry, a much larger body of unofficial writing standing behind it, and a setting that keeps proving, in its own games, that more than one version of the truth can be true at once. Some of what gets called the Godhead is stated plainly on the record. Most of it comes from a poet god who admits to lying, and a developer who left the studio and kept writing anyway. Both kinds of source shape this world, and neither one settles it alone.